Actually, that was one of the comments that I had, and I like what you've done to this, and I like the fact that, you know, the police are the point of enforcement rather than the zoning officer, so I think that's a big improvement over the existing ordinance. But I guess my question gets back to the time limitation that's in our existing ordinance. On one hand, that also provides sort of an objective measurement of when something becomes a disturbance or not, right? So if someone's having an outdoor party in their yard, maybe even involving a band, if it's done during sort of reasonable hours, I wouldn't necessarily determine that to be a disturbance. But reading through this ordinance, it could be interpreted as such. If there's a complaint, the police could then therefore go in and issue a citation. I would think that having some hourly limitations may be actually helpful on that side, to kind of give some parameters around it. You know, anybody's barbecue potentially could be a noise disturbance under this ordinance. If a neighbor happens to complain about a gathering of, you know, a family for an outing with perhaps some music or even not music, loud conversation, you know, it could be considered a disturbance according to this. Whereas in the previous ordinance, you know, as long as it was before 10 o'clock, it was kind of untouchable. So it's something I would ask us to consider as we're finalizing this. But I do think it's much simpler and cleaned up, but it leaves open to some interpretation.
So shall we continue this discussion at the work session then? Okay.
Okay. And in the meantime, as I said, I'll talk to both Joanne and the chief, and I'll do some research on how the other municipalities have fared so far. All right. And last item is the parking permit ordinance. I guess I'll defer to Gerard in the traffic committee.
Okay. There's a couple things on the parking permit ordinance that I think we need to land on. And Paul and I had a brief discussion about this earlier. There's basically a couple components. One is the recommendation from the parking committee that a residents only, or not residents only, but a resident permit section of town be adopted, so that on certain streets within the town there would be resident permit parking, unlimited parking, and then anyone who is a non-resident would have a 2-hour limitation. I'm doing this from memory, but it was Court Street, Penn Street, Mercer, Center Ave, in that area, up until Congress was the area that we were discussing. And so we'd like to incorporate, see how that would be incorporated into the existing parking ordinance to provide for residential permit parking. And then from our conversation, Paul thought that was relatively easy to incorporate and to add. And then the other piece gets back to the use of the municipal lots and allocation of the business permits. And we need to land on a recommendation on how those are allocated and how many per business entity. And that's the piece that's still to be defined. And I see a couple members of our parking committee, Paul and Warren here, and I know Mike was at our last meeting as well. Anything on that front that you want to continue?
That front. No, I think you've well stated it. the discussion, particularly last month, really came down to an appreciation that the resident parking and limitation on non-residents for 2 hours works hand in glove with the work that's being done on moving employees to the designated parking, particularly 10 Center in town. Because the truth is, this whole controversy came from the pressure on the parking spaces on the streets you just noted, and residents being unable to park in front of their own homes until sometime into the evening. So it's really a two-pronged approach, as you just said, describing the changes to the parking ordinance to allow the resident right of parking at all times, 2 hours for everyone else, but then understanding there has to be a shift of the people who are parking there now during the day somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? Well, that somewhere else hopefully is going to be by designated municipal allocation of parking, working with the business owners to have their support and encouragement and, frankly, permits being purchased from the borough for that objective. So those two things work very much together. And when we talk about amending the ordinance for the resident parking, it's not in isolation. It's with, moving ahead and planning for the folks who are parking there now as a matter of convenience during the day to have somewhere to go. So it is something we look forward to, I think, in the committee you're chairing at the upcoming meeting, of having the business owners and the residents together. And frankly, also being able to hear an exchange of ideas there or issues, but ultimately with the same objective to have those streets return to a more measured approach which allows residents to be able to park in front of their homes, all others 2 hours, but gets the employees somewhere where everyone knows they're able to park. And that's principally behind 10 Center for the moment, but maybe some other locations. The question I had, Paul, without looking at the ordinance, was, are all these changes in the single ordinance, or are we're talking about two, aren't we?
Well, what we would have to do is change the permit ordinance, because right now the permit ordinance only addresses permits for the municipal lots, but we could incorporate the issuance of residential permits there, but we'd have to change the actual parking ordinance. So, where we say from, Washington Avenue 20 feet up on the right northeast side, there's no parking, we'd have to add a new section there, because I don't think there's any. Is there any time restricted parking in the borough at this time?
Other than State Street,
Right.
no.
Okay, so yeah, there are a couple of spots in State Street. So we would have to add either a new section or expand that section, and then add the descriptions of Court, Center, Mercer, and Penn Streets. So there would have that section that limits it to 2 hour parking, and then the permit section that essentially waives that restriction. I mean, there would be cross references, but those I believe would be the only two ordinances that would need to be modified.
Well, do you have enough information at this point on the resident parking 2 hours, others, to begin to draft those? Do you know?
I certainly do. I think where I'm going to need the input, and I could draft something and send it to Gerard, and he could bring it. When is your committee next meeting?
Tomorrow evening.
I will not have it by then. But I could
is that
certainly.
a problem?
I could certainly draft something quickly, not that quickly.
Looks like
but
we'll be done soon tonight.
yeah, that's true. We are getting out. No, I could draft something. I'm sure there'll be specifics that I'll need filled in, but it should not be a problem.
I guess my only concern is this is one of those things that seems to have been, and rightly so, talked about for many years. It's been a recurrent issue, and now there's a consensus on how to proceed. If we can actually get it into a drafted form, then it seems to me we're still 60 days out from being able to do anything. Assuming we were to get it at the next meeting and authorize it for advertising, we can still work on the other in the meantime.
Yeah, so and just so I'm clear then, the ordinance that I previously drafted regarding the permits, I think the changes that are needed for that really is just deciding how we're going to limit, if we're going to limit any individual applicant to the number of permits that are issued. But otherwise, I'm going to expand that to include and add the residential parking permits, and then the separate section creating those 2 hour restricted areas.
Correct, but going back to, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
We'll get into that. The answer is yes.
And I think after, maybe after tomorrow night, we can give you the sort of guidance on that second question of how to issue and the allotment of,
Well, and it's not just for the lot permits, also, what are the rules going to be for the residential parking permits? I mean, I assume that's not an unlimited number, and I don't know if you're going to base it on number of occupants, size of the houses. I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to be distributed, but you're going to need to think about allocation there too, because presumably somebody with a house is not going to be able to get 10 permits. So, if you can give me
Right, we'll
guidance
give
on
you
those
that
two
as well.
issues, yep.
that
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay.
And then Mike referenced 10th Center. Should we, the potential of using that for the municipality is still being discussed?
Correct.
Right.
Well, to be clear, I thought it was pretty much done.
It's current, we're talking about the lot behind the...
Yeah.
Okay. It is currently being used by the municipality, and I believe that the borough is maintaining that area. That we're undergoing a process of formalizing that arrangement at this point.
Okay, has there been a lease exchanged yet, or a license agreement, or whatever it is?
Not as of yet, and that was discussed prior, but we'll fill you in.
Okay. I look forward to that.
Anything else?
I have nothing further.
I had one item to ask you about. A couple months ago, I sent a letter to Keystone Municipal Services asking them to respond to a audit we had received from the state, and I have not heard anything. There's been no response back from Keystone, and I'm wondering whether at this point we should be asking you to follow up with Keystone to get a response.
I have no problem sending a letter with council's direction.
Do you need a motion to that effect? Paul, do you need a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that would be
Okay.
nice.
Could I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Okay, one opposed.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else for the solicitor?
No, if I could just ask if you can send me a copy. I may have it in the file.
Of the
but if
letter
you could
that I
send me a
sent?
copy of the letter,
Certainly.
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.